Hey everybody, Dean Sweetman here. Welcome to the show today. It's going to be a fantastic one. We've got a great special guest that we get to. Mr. Frank, you can probably see him, but when he speaks, he sounds like Jabba the Hutt. So we're going to keep him in the cave. And he's like, I'm the technical one. This shouldn't be happening. And of course, I'm the untechnical one and have flawlessly, like always, using the technology beautifully. So while Frank kind of gets things worked out, he may or may not be. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I had to leave because my smoke alarm went off and my plumber was banging around. Drama. So it's just still part of the fun here. So welcome. Today, we're in for a real treat. First of all, we're going to be talking about like really key must-know facts about church apps. And we've got who's become a great friend. He's our senior engineer on the app side. And that is an incredible man called John Holtkamp, who is in Cincinnati, Ohio. John, how you doing?
Hey, doing well. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you here, man. You and I met at some other conference. I'm pretty sure it was in Ohio, like, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, maybe?
It was a while ago. It seems forever ago.
Yeah. And then through a bunch of cool things that happened, and we decided to get legit on our app platform. You basically swooped in and have really built what, I think is, comparable to anything else on the market today.
Yep. Awesome.
And that's pretty much because of John. So
no, it's the team. It is the team.
It is the team.
I'm jumping right there and saying I have an awesome team.
Yeah, Nick Peterson is like an epic dude. And then we've got Carly. The app team is just, it's a really great crew. So good to have you here, man.
It's great to be here.
So we're going to get straight into it and just ask some of the basics about apps. So we're talking about customized engagement apps that churches can have on app stores, either iOS or Android. And so I guess the first thing that we want to drill down into is why should a church have an app in the first place? Can their website not, do the same thing, or do they need both?
This is a great question, and whenever I talk with a bunch of people about church apps, this is the first thing I have to hit on, because this is usually the biggest barrier to get over when you're talking about church apps, because nowadays a lot of churches have really good-looking mobile websites. So a lot of churches feel like, hey, we're just fine because we got a great-looking mobile website. But there's a number of reasons why you really need to consider that isn't the end goal when it comes to what you should be doing with an app. And you'll hear different angles that are taken with this. Mm-hmm. First of all, you can have really fast HTML5 websites now. And that's what is often kind of brought up when websites are mentioned. You can have something just as snappy as an app at this point. So why wouldn't we just do that? And I think in that discussion, a lot of times they're forward thinking, like maybe in 5 years this would be possible. And I know that, for instance, like the Church on the Move website, they have a special HTML5 website that they feature, but it's just like a solid color and there's no imagery. And in order to do that and have it so snappy, it has to be so bland that it isn't really something you're going to be pushing people to. It's more like a demo than anything. Right. Next up, if you're not doing something like that, then you're going to be having slow load times. It's going to be sluggish. And now you're having to talk people through the process of creating bookmarks on their phone and how do they open it. And it creates a whole set of problems. And you can't even do a lot of the things you want to do with an app, like sermon notes. I've seen WordPress themes and companies that offer to have sermon notes, but they're usually very forced. They feel like they're caching and stuff. So if you clear your cache, you just lost everything you had. Like downloading audio. If you want to listen offline, a lot of times you're just required to listen over LTE because there's no ability to download. Or if you download, there's no easy way to figure out where that download's at. It just creates a lot of confusion. But ignoring those two facts, the real reason I would say that you don't want to do this is that really the two should be two different things. Your website is the front door to your church for visitors to really get information about your church for the first time. And because of that, your website should probably include just about everything. That doesn't mean like when you go to the front page of the website, it should scroll forever. But you really want to have all the content there anybody could ever want. And a lot of that content is stuff that you're going to view just one time. So this is stuff people will just look at once and they'll probably never come back to again because there's no reason for them to come back to it again. Right. But I have a rule of thumb I've made up for how I think, like when someone comes to me and says, hey, what should we put in our app? Here's our website. We got all this stuff. Here's stuff we have on these third-party websites. What should go in? And my rule of thumb is the 20% rule. And I say, would 20% of your church, and not everyone, but just 20% of your church be able to use what you're adding to your app every single week? So everyone's probably not going to use it every week, but could 20% of your church use it every week? Because you want reusable content in the app, because you want people coming back over and over again and using it. In your website, you're probably not going to be able to answer yes, and you shouldn't be able to answer yes, because that's not what your website's for. But if your app is full of content that nobody's going to come back to, well, it's going to get real bad real fast. And that's where the difference is. If your website makes a really good app, your website probably doesn't have the content it needs to have. And if your app makes a really good website, well, your app is not functioning the way it should. So that's kind of where, while there's all these things that are brought up out there about, like, well, what HTML5, this. In the end, they're really not even supposed to be one and the same anyway.
Right. Yeah, that's very helpful. I think the distinction between a website that is for visitors largely, because I think it's definitely high. 70+% of people that are going to visit your church going to go to the website first. Mm-hmm. And they're going to check everything out. They might listen to a sermon. They want to see what kind of small groups you have. They want to see what you believe. My number one pet peeve about church websites is the two things you've got to tell me without me scrolling, clicking, or doing anything is where it is and what time do I have to turn up. It's amazing how many slick websites and look so cool. But as a visitor who that's what it's for, I'm clicking around forever. But then the distinction I think you're making is there's content that's constantly being uploaded in the app side of thing that can be consumed by church members on a regular basis, and you just don't want those two things mixing.
Yes, exactly.
Love it.
Can I ask a quick question? How's my audio?
I got. Yeah, sorry, Frank, you're still jabbering. So I got this kind of cool little list here of objections that I want to go through, and I know you're going to bat them all down. So one of them is that there's stat out there where most people spend time on only just 5 apps. So our phones are loaded. I have pages and pages of apps, and then I have stacked apps inside the apps. I'm not one of those people that just does 5 apps. I use a lot of apps. But what would you say to pastors that might think, people are not going to open this thing. People only look at 5 apps and that's it.
Mm-hmm. So I think I know the stat you're talking about. There's a stat that 90% of the time spent within mobile apps is spent in just 5 apps. And that's going to be your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm actually not sure what the last 2 are. But just like 5 major apps is where almost all of time is spent. So the first consideration there is usually when you look at the naysayer of apps, they will first of all be willing to admit that at least 50% of time spent on digital content is actually in mobile apps. And that's a lot of time. So I say that because we're saying the last 10% is all that, perhaps the last 10% is all that your app's getting, right? Yeah. But if you consider how much time is being spent, like how much of that digital time is being spent, that 10% is, a few hours, maybe 5 hours a week. Right. And if your church app is getting a lot of that alongside those other 5 apps, that's probably all that you actually want to have spent within your app. And I say that because you're both iPhone users, is that correct?
Yep.
All right. So I know I work in the media department at my church. I lead the group there on Sunday mornings, and Sunday morning during, I forget, first or second service, we all pull out our iPhones at the same time because we get a message from Apple. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
It's the screen time one. It's how often have I been looking at my phone? And last year was the big year where Google and Apple came out and said, hey, there's a serious problem. There's maybe an epidemic right now where people cannot stop looking at their phones because a new piece of technology was introduced a few years ago, and now our minds, we don't know how to deal with it. Society hasn't figured out how to deal with it, and it's created a huge problem for us.
True.
And
it's addictive, especially among teenagers, millennials.
Yeah, well, and I would actually argue in some cases, especially with Facebook, even people in their 50s and 60s, it can be a huge problem. And that's why the millennials don't want to get on there because they're all...
Yeah, exactly.
But what I'm saying here is you don't want to be one of those 5 apps. You're part of the problem if you're one of those 5 apps. Yeah. So, we definitely want people engaging with church and we want people looking at that content. I mean, what we're looking for is for them to be engaging with church for that hour or two a week outside of Sunday morning. So honestly, that stat puts us right where we want to be when you consider how much people are using mobile apps. Awesome. And then what percent of the time is spent there. So I can see how that stat can be presented in a negative way, but honestly, in the times we're in now, it's right where I would want to be.
So we'll get to this in a little bit, but the content is going to drive things very much so. And what you have and reasons for getting that app open, 2, 3, 4 times a week is pretty key. We'll get to that. We have this other little pushback here about all the noise that's on the app stores. And there's, I guess millions now, right, of apps. 60% have never been downloaded. I kind of know the answer to this question, but I'm interested to get your feedback. But why should a church bother with an app if most people don't even download it?
Okay, that's a great question. And that 60% stat is a terrifying stat to look at if you have no context. Now, the thing about that 60% stat is if Frank came to me and said, "Hey, John, I want to start developing apps. I see that Apple just announced that they paid out like $120 billion to app developers since they started the App Store. There's got to be at least $1 million there for me." I would immediately say, "Hey, you have a big problem. Don't dive into this. It's not that easy. You could have an excellent idea. You could sell it to me. You could tell me the idea, and I could be like, that is a fantastic idea, Frank. The problem is, even once you make that app, it's so hard to get noticed because you don't have a platform to be able to talk about that app on. So that amazing app that Frank releases that he spent years making on his own, it'll probably get downloaded by a few people, and maybe he can get on even the local news and people around the area will download it. But it's never going to take off and make him that $1 million app developer. But the difference between that and church is at church, you have a platform. Every Sunday morning, you can mention the app. In your church newsletter, if you have one, you can mention the app.
It's a built-in audience, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I mean, you have not only do you have the ability to talk about the app, you can let people know why they should want to use the app. So that 60% stat, I imagine so much of that. And I know the 60% stat's actually Google Play. So the difference between Apple and Google is that Google doesn't really have a review process. So there's no quality control there other than making sure that hopefully there aren't viruses coming in through the app. They try to have bots check that. But on iOS, you have a human checking the app to help quality control. But so on Android, you have no quality control. So, I mean, when Frank releases Flappy Bird's 21, there's no one stopping him from doing that. And there's no way anybody's ever downloading it because they have 20 iterations of a game that was bad when it came out originally. Yeah. So I think that's where the biggest problem is. It's so easy to get an app on the Google Play. There's so much stuff that's just copying other stuff that wasn't good. And then once you make Flappy Bird 21, who are you going to tell? If you post it on a forum, everyone's just going to make fun of you. So of course it's not going to be downloaded.
Yeah. I think the other key thing is communication, and we have a very kind of dedicated, way in which we help our customers, our churches roll out their app and how they can communicate. We coach them all the way through that. It's like a 5 or 6 week period where we're not just building the app, we're planning the rollout and how this is going to be done effectively. And so I think a definite kind of communication strategy around the launch is pretty key to get more than 1 or 2 people in the church getting the app. We've got churches getting 50, 60, 70% of their congregation downloading the app because they launch it correctly.
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely.
So how can churches, and this kind of leads into that, what are the best practices for churches encouraging their members to download the app? And we can go, and this is kind of cool that we can segue into this a little bit deeper. But, you signed up, we built you an app, you love it, it looks fantastic. It's, got the pastor's podcast in there, maybe the video podcast, there's sermon notes. You can make your own notes within the sermon notes with our app. You've got the bulletin, maybe you've got an event coming up, you put the event, you wanted to pay for the event in the app. Let's say we built this beautiful, Rolls-Royce app, which we do every day. What are the best practices for actually getting the congregation to listen and download?
So I'm going to a little bit of story time here. I started making apps for churches back in 2012. I thought I was inventing something, but I was. There were a bunch of people that kind of came up with the idea at the same time.
Right.
I just reinvented the wheel accidentally. But so we had an app at my church in 2012. And then come 2015, we probably had around a 10% adoption rate in a church of around 400.
Right.
And I didn't really have anything to compare even then. But a church, I was working with a bunch of churches at the time, and I noticed this church up in Columbus that I noticed they had over 1,000 people install the app on a single Sunday.
Wow.
So I'm like, I've got to contact this church and figure out what they did. And he just walked me through the process of what they did. And this was actually not even an app launch. This was an update. And what they did was they stopped service. So they said, hey, we have this new updated ads, this, and this. So what I want you to do right now is pull out your phones and then just stop.
Right.
Now, the problem is I think a lot of churches would do that. I want you to pull out your phones and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you give no one time to catch up.
Right.
Like what? Like if you're already diving in, how many of those people even know what the App Store is or how to get to Google Play?
Right.
And you can't assume people know how to do stuff. So you really got to stop and walk them through that. And if you do that, they will feel so good about the fact that they downloaded the app and that they can use the app. So for launching and getting those initial installs, I think the very best way is coming up with a strategy like that, where on Sunday morning, you're willing for just one Sunday or maybe for that first month to actually dedicate some time in service to coaching people through it, realizing everyone might not be there the first week. So realizing you may need to take 3 minutes out of service. And we're not talking about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or anything like that. It's a small bit there. But at first, the way to get those initial installs is really to give people time to get it and realize people don't know how to use the App Store or Google Play as well as you do.
And walk them through it. So, yeah, that's something we have to communicate to pastors all the time. They're so time poor in that, 60 to 90 minutes that they've got people and think, oh, man, I can't give up 3 minutes on a stupid app. But it's like, no, you wanted this thing. We built a great product for you. It's incredibly important that you take those 3 minutes, maybe 3 times, in a month, and give people that space. So it's literally take out your phone. And, this happens on the giving side too. It's like, oh, we've got the giving app, but you didn't take time to get people to get out their phones, download the app, put their credit card in, set it up, and make a first-time gift.
Yeah.
Like if you do that, people giving digitally, which we know always increases what they give because there's more consistency, giving goes up. If you take the time to say, okay, church, we'll get this great app, and it's a celebration because you're doing something that, sure, some other churches are doing it, but there's others that aren't. There's companies that don't have this kind of technology available to them. And so you're really kind of putting a great foot forward as far as your church and how technologically savvy you are. And it feels great to be able for a member to say, hey, check out my church app to a friend, right? Or if you're evangelizing or whatever. So it's
real fast,
take the time to do it.
And a huge thing there with you saying pulling out the phone, another great thing about an app is when people come in as first-time visitors into the church, for you to be able to say, hey, pull out your phone. That's huge because churches so often will focus on their greeting team, like so many people talking to the same person over and over again and being able to make them feel welcome. But I really think that only goes so far. Like that can actually be a little awkward once you start having enough people greet you. I mean, it's great. And I'm definitely not discouraging it. But to be able to let someone have the familiarity, as dumb as it is, this friend of yours, your phone that you're so used to using, to be able to give them access to that and tell them, hey, you have permission to use that. We actually want you to use it. I actually think that subconsciously is making them feel at home at your church. And it's something you really can't give them any other way. So I absolutely love the fact that that's just kind of one of the many, many reasons that makes a church app so great to be able to have in a church. So one little quick story. I had a customer here in LA, and I went and visited them because they were local, and this was a couple of years ago. And, I came into the office, and there was a stack of color-printed bulletins. And I asked the lady at the desk, I said, how many of these do you print a week? And she says, about 1,000. And I said, what's that, about $1,500? She's like, yep, give or take. And so when I went upstairs to meet the rector and the other, team guys, I took one with me. And, I said, we're chatting away on giving and apps. And I said, you guys are spending $1,500 a week. For $59, we can put all this and make it better into an app, and you're going to save a ton of money. And they all looked, every single one of them looked at me like the penny dropped, because I showed them some other apps. And it's like, a few months later,
I'm there, just kind of became friends with, the admin guys there. And we were at lunch, and I said, how many bulletins you're printing these days? She said, oh, we just do a few dozen and keep them up the back. Because awesome. Everyone, all that bulletin content is like right inside the app that you can easily produce, apart from all the other things that happen as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a money saver.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to just push to, and we kind of touched on this, how getting users encouraged to use the app. So let's maybe go through a little bit of some of the content that we put in the app and how sticky that gets, right? Because, and we've talked about some of it here, but let's go a little deeper. Having content in the application that is updated, that is current, that is, very user-friendly, in and of itself is going to automatically get people used to opening the app. One of the biggest things for me is that if I miss a Sunday, I still find it a challenge, like on podcast, and I got to go and find the podcast and I save it, and do I switch it to automatic download? And like, I love the fact that I can just open the church app and there it is, and I play it. Mm-hmm. Right? What are some other cool? I'd like to talk a little bit about sermon notes, because if churches use sermon notes, that's an incredible sticky thing that brings people back into the app.
So if a church comes to me and asks for what should they put in their app, I actually start at sermon notes. And it's because sermon notes are good in so many ways. First of all, like if you ask me for like the top 3 things to do to get people to use the app regularly, one is promote. You got to promote. Because we talked about the first 3 or 4 weeks taking taking that, like, 3 minutes maybe, like a decent chunk of service just to get people to download the app. But so many churches assume after that, this thing is just going to run itself. Everyone's just going to keep using the app, and you need a way to promote the app. And I have stories of how just by not mentioning the app one Sunday, app usage would drop to half, and then they'd mention it and it would go back up, and then they wouldn't mention it, it would go back down. Like, it's consistently drops just because it wasn't mentioned a single time on Sunday. Right. But having sermon notes gives you the ability to naturally mention that you have an app on Sunday morning. You can say, hey, if you want to pull out your phone, you can follow along in our app. And how long did that take me? I didn't take me 5 seconds. So we're no longer asking for 3 minutes. We're saying 5 seconds.
Just pause on that point. There's a cultural shift that I think pastors need to make the jump. It's okay for people to pull out their phone in church, right? So obviously we do giving, and like that happens on a phone. And like if you're around the offering, you're like, hey guys, get out your phone. We're about to give. Sermon notes is a great way for people. So, but some pastors are like, oh, I don't want them. They'll be distracted and they'll be doing like Instagram. Well, maybe, but in reality, if they're engaging, in the sermon, and they can see the sermon and see the scriptures and then fill in blanks like you can do with us, that's a phenomenal way to be able to, like get involved sitting with your phone out in the moment.
Yeah, and I engage with the sermon so much better when I have notes. And the advantage of having something like digital notes within your app is you don't have margins you're writing in, or you don't only have that blank. You can write as many notes as you want. And you can go back up and just keep writing. And then once you want to send those notes to yourself, we have the ability to email them. You can even have a PDF that's sent to you of those notes. And now that's stored in your email client or whatever you want. And it makes it so easy to access those notes again instead of trying to keep a pile of papers that just stacks up. And I mean, it's unsustainable. Eventually, you're going to have a problem with storing years of sermon notes that you hand wrote versus having something like this where they're stored digitally in your whatever email or however you want to do it. But
so they store in the app. Like once people create a note and you save it, it's there forever.
Yep, that's something we do that's cool, is you can either save it to the app or you can email it. And like I said, that email will have the actual email body will be the notes you took, but also there's an attached PDF that's just formatted exactly like what you see in the app that you also have. So, I mean, it's really up to you how you want to handle it at that point. But it saves those notes to the Notes app on your phone. So, yeah, it's just saved right there to your phone ready.
Yeah, so I think obviously sermon notes, podcasts, audio or video, like if you're not recording, it's so easy to set up and record the sermon, run it through the desk, create an MP3 file through the desk that you've got great audio built in, 100%. Every church should be doing that.
And then being able to download that sermon. I listen to so many churches while I run. And I honestly can't tell you like how I fit into the mold of what most people are like, but I probably listen to 6 different churches every week, and only one of those is mine. So there's got to be more people like that, and being able to download that sermon, go out the door, and not be listening over LTE, but have downloaded over Wi-Fi and go running. It's just huge to me to be able to do that. So having audio sermons on there, especially I love video sermons, but I'm very biased towards audio just because of the ease of listening wherever, driving or whatever I want to do.
Right, wherever you are. And then with events, one of the cool things that you can do is create an event. If you've got a conference coming up, you can put it in the events tab. But you can also send a push notification, right? Saying, hey, don't forget the men's conference is coming up, register here, swipe, boom, up comes the registration page. And now you've got people signing up for an event and paying for it. Like no more people walking around with, pen and paper and, maybe a clunky, like, iPad where you're trying to punch stuff in. It's just pushing it onto the church member where they can do the whole thing for you, and having those kind of things built into the app, I think it just becomes very sticky.
And I think the calendar is something that's often overlooked as just whatever, but the calendar is huge, and I think that oftentimes for churches that are using the calendar correctly and like having the registration, that is the most important part of the whole app. Yeah. And something that I learned was at our church, along the path of trying different things, was one thing we did was I spoke to the staff as well as the key leaders in the church and just told them what the app could do. And I walked through this stuff: sermon notes, this is what we want to do; events, this is what we want to do; audio, this is what we want to do, and just taught them that, like, if we can create a culture of this app, like the people using this app, whenever any question comes up, the answer can be, hey, have you checked the app? And it's not to make them feel dumb or to make it seem over simple, but it is that easy. And that way you're not like, hey, if you go home and you click and look on your computer and click up there and click here and you follow this menu to here, nobody's going to go and do that. And you definitely don't want to do it on your phone on a website. But in the app, you can just be like, hey, open it, and you press this tab. Boom, and there's the event. You can sign up right there. It just makes it so things can start to shift. And at my church, actually, after having that talk with leadership, within about 3 to 4 months, I had this couple in their 70s come up to me and start telling me how to use the app. They had no idea that I made the app. And like that was where I was like, oh my gosh, this changes everything. Like people, and that's not the only time that's happened to me. I've probably maybe 10 to 15 times in the last 3 or 4 years had people come and start teaching me how to use the app, and I love it. I was like, oh, okay, that's really cool. You can do that. Yeah,
no, that's great. I think just having people engaged in the app is going to make them better church members. And if you've got like a weather affected Sunday, like we've got crazy weather right now, right? So there's a good chance in parts of the world, we happen to be in the US, where the Sunday is going to shut down. And so like that's a lost opportunity to both communicate the message, that the series that you're in, receive an offering that churches need most weeks. So if you've got a great engagement, you can send out a push notification and say, hey, it's icy outside, stay home, it's safe, but I'm going to be recording a podcast, and hit, swipe here to listen. And don't forget to give, right? So you can really, and the other fact is that if you're doing great, 60 to 65% of your church are turning up on a Sunday. And that's like when we talked about announcing anything from church should be done 3 times. I'm convinced of it. And so when you have got, people are doing kids sport, and there's soccer, and there's weather, and there's the vacation, and Uncle Joe's coming into town, what better thing for people to have in their hands than a connection to the church to stay engaged, stay connected, and be involved.
Mm-hmm. And I love what you said about bad weather. I mean, right in Cincinnati, where I am at right now, it's -2 out right now. Snow's everywhere. Everything was closed today. And of the last 3 weeks, 2 of the last 3 weeks, church was canceled all around. And I listened to a church up in Columbus, and I got to listen to their message, even though church was canceled, and it was one of the best messages I've heard in the last 2 months. And so this church, he planned out his message, and he just gave it, and it was fantastic. So I was running just thinking, he mentioned at the start, like, there was no church. I just couldn't believe, like, I'm getting this content, and church didn't even happen, but I get to get this content. So it's huge.
Very smart. Okay, last question. And this goes to people's fears about Google or Apple. Can they just shut down your app? Can they shut down a church app at any moment? Should church leaders worry about that?
So this is a huge question because at the end, well, in July of 2017, things started shifting with Apple. And to give a little background of what was going on, and this isn't just with church apps. I think in the church app world, people assume it was just church apps, and sometimes people even like to point the finger at Apple and be like, "How dare you come after churches?" It had nothing to do with churches.
Right.
The problem is in the church app world, so many companies that were releasing church apps were just using white labels or websites to build their apps, and they had no control over the actual code that went into that app. They were just using a website that was made to build a very generic app, and they kind of shoehorned a church app in there where oftentimes you couldn't download messages. If notes were in there, it was very funky and didn't work well at all, and you had all kinds of bugs, and it really created an experience that felt very generic, very low quality. And I come here saying that, and it's easy to say, well, yeah, you just want to promote yourself. But honestly, Apple's the one that banned all those apps, not me, right? So that's exactly what happened. Apple said, hey, there's all this low quality stuff. We got to quit allowing it in here. And they didn't actually remove those apps. They just said you can't update them, which in a general sense over the years is going to kind of get rid of them or force them to update. But I would wager that before that happened, probably around 75% of the church app developers were doing that. And that's why we still feel ripples now. We still see articles written now about that sort of thing. But when that happens, Apple is always, and Google is always sending out emails and information to the developers saying, hey, this is coming. You really need to prep for it, or you're going to have problems. But when someone doesn't know anything about programming and is just using a website, they have no way to do anything about it.
Right.
So in my opinion, and once again, I'm obviously biased towards having a development team. If you have a team that can actually code the apps, we can just roll with it. I mean, that's what you want. Apple honestly made church apps better.
So yeah, I love that. What is seen as a negative broadly, in your opinion, actually made apps better.
Oh yeah.
Right. So, but what did you and the team do specifically that now makes it an even better experience as far as the apps and how safe they are on the App Store?
Okay, so what I love that the team does is both on the Android front and the iOS front. We do everything. We do both of those separate, so it feels very custom to the platform you're on. We're not just doing some middleware that posts to both or publishes to both of those. But we make sure that as new updates come out, we're always staying on top of it. And I mean, I'm excited to say we were the first major church app company to support iPhone 10, iPhone 10s, iPhone 10R, iPad Pro, which just came out. We were months ahead of anybody with that. And we're just staying on top of that stuff because we understand it's easy to forget. So if your leadership team is just using iPhone 8s and the iPhone 10s comes out, well, you're 2 generations behind now. It's easy to not realize, hey, there's these black bars for everyone. Right. But I see huge ministries, huge churches. I mean, we're talking some of the biggest ones in the world, and they still don't support iPhone 10. Just iPhone 10. Right. So just being able to stay on top of that and know that, hey, we're supporting the churches we work with so that on day one, we when someone opens Facebook at your church, it's not updated. But when they open your church app, it's ready to go. And that's got to mean something to those people to be able to see, wow, my church app is really on top of things. And I realize that's not as important as the content, like your sermon notes, like your podcast. Like that stuff's way more important. But you also have people in their 20s and 30s that are looking at your app. And if it is really crummy, it's whether or not it should, it's really damaging your reputation. And in the end, if you have a crummy app, it's actually probably working against you. The same goes if you're not posting content to your app. It's working against you. You got to do the stuff right or it actually ends up pushing you backwards.
Love it. So good. Man, we could go on. It's a fascinating subject. Thanks, John. Really appreciate your time. And I know we're so busy getting, I don't know how many apps a month, probably maybe even 100 close to this month that we're getting out the door. So I know you and your team are busy and appreciate the time that you took.
Yeah, this was great.
Awesome, buddy. We'll see you soon.
Yep, I'll see you.
Hey, so everyone, massive amount of information, and we're really, really excited to be able to bring our app platform to you. It's always getting better. We feel it's just best in class no matter what. So it's a bum we didn't have Frank today, but we will soldier on. We've got Phil Bowdle, the author of Rethink Communication, next week. So that's going to be fun. And we'll sign off and say, hey, thanks for joining. God bless. And we'll see you next time. See ya.